special ANC NEC meeting was held over the weekend with a massive focus on the economy. Now, there's been much anticipation about whether or not the party will back Finance Minister Tito Mbowene's economic turnaround plan. Let's get you some analysis now. Economist Kanti Pai joins us in studio. Thanks, as always, for coming in.
Good afternoon.
I always find it quite strange when that turnaround plan was first dropped in a very sort of unusual way. It was widely welcomed by one part of, let's say, the country, but criticized by another part. Isn't this the time for us to do things in unusual ways?
It is definitely such a time. And I think actually the difficulty was not so much actually the contents that were either welcome or criticized, but the process in which it was released. And that was actually something that was troubling, because I think in some ways we actually want to be now to get past this idea that how was this thing done, but actually are we going to benefit from it?
Absolutely.
And I think this is the third case, because actually it turns out that we are going to go through that how process first before we actually get to the contents.
I mean, you can't help but roll your eyes because everything just becomes about political point scoring.
Absolutely. And you know what, I think what is quite sad about it is that it doesn't matter whether you agree or disagree, because I think there's enough in there to actually disagree with, and that should be fine, because actually this is such a time as to say these certain things have been tried, they have not worked, therefore we must focus on these kinds of things. So that engagement is necessary. What we know for sure doesn't work is this kind of all-round consultation with every single person and every single sort of feelings. That we know doesn't work, but what we actually need to engage with is more the content rather than actually the personalities and people's personal feelings.
So what do you reckon the NEC will say about this turnaround plan? I mean, Tito Mbowene's been quite harsh about the place that the economy is in, and rightly so, and he says our decisions that we make around the economy are becoming more and more stark every day. Growth likely to remain below 2% for the next 2 years if we don't do something drastic.
Absolutely, and that's what the President reflects on this morning also in his letter, to say, look, growth is beyond expectations and even beyond what we need it to be. I think one of the key things, of course, is this big problem with unemployment that continues to rage on unabated.
10 million people.
10 million people is a huge number of people. And it's quite clear that there is no economy that has ever grown with actually not using its people and its all available natural resources. Your human resources is a huge and important part of an economy. I mean, I think obviously we repeat it over and over, especially around young people, participating and actually doing something with their youthful energy. I think that's a huge problem, especially in the face of what the President keeps talking about, the fourth industrial revolution and all these developments that are coming up, which actually are going to require creativity, young, fresh minds, those kinds of things. So we are in major trouble. And one would have hoped that we are a little bit past the wranglings around presentation, but rather content.
So you talk about this letter that dropped this morning, the letter from the President's desk, and I suppose we're looking at it also in light of this Economic Advisory Council that the President has also now appointed. It's valuable, I suppose, to get international and local input on our economy, but is it more of a talk shop? Is it another commission of inquiry?
It's very difficult to say. I think when I read the press statement, it said that, it would help guidance so every 3 months. So I guess it might be a part of an evaluation system, because remember the President already has an economic advisor who would actually interact, I suspect, with a lot of the literature that's out there, with a lot of the information that's out there about what works and what is not working. The President is actually building a policy unit. That policy unit would also be a very important part of actually how we evaluate policy across just not the economy but other sectors of the whether it's in politics, whether it's in infrastructure, those kinds of things. So this is probably maybe an overriding factor. And then, of course, the President gets a lot of advice from the NEC itself, because that's where, a lot of the ANC policies debated. There's an ANC policy unit. So there's a lot of ideas coming through. So one wonders where this will fit in, but hopefully maybe it is just going to be another area of evaluation of what we are doing. I suspect so.
And the other issue is that, economists differ quite widely on the challenges facing the economy and how we're going to face it. Do you know, just from what we know about this Economic Advisory Council, whether it has a clear mandate, a clear vision?
The statement suggests that there's going to be a secretariat and much of the stuff. Usually with these councils, they are at request. So every quarterly basis, perhaps they are fed a number of documents to say, can you talk to us, can you talk to the President about this at the end of the quarter? So when they arrive there, they actually get to evaluate what the President is interested in, what he's thinking, and they give, opinions. So perhaps, as you say, you would call it a talk show, but maybe an ideas forum and thinking forum, and that the policy unit itself is going to have a big big secretariat part of that to make sure that, I guess, to capture all the insights that might be in the cycle of news and events and development.
And maybe this is what the finance minister is concerned about, that there's too much talking and not enough action, and this is why he's sort of presented this quite radical plan, and part of that plan is around SOEs. He says they pose a massive risk to economic stability, and we know that.
Yeah, I thought one thing what would have been interesting about his plan was whether or not, if we had, widely and sufficiently debated it, and therefore he had the inputs that he needed, he could actually take that and translate it into some of the discussions that he needs in terms of formulating the budget, the next budget cycle. Remember, we are going into the mini budget right now, and that might have been a good opportunity for our inputs, because then he can actually write that into very practical ways in terms of how we fund. So, for example, if he talks about water infrastructure, that if people have enough inputs there and we've debated something robust, then we think about how do we then fund those things in which we actually believe in. If we're thinking about, we're going to keep Eskom at the way it is, then how do we fund Eskom to keep it this way? So those kinds of input would have been very interesting for me. And so I think it is somewhat a lost opportunity, regardless of the fact that we might think or not think. So if you think we should sell these SOEs, then by then we would announce some really tangible plans of which ones would be sold, which one would be kept, for what reason, so that actually this is a lost opportunity, I think.
I want to just ask you, while we have you here in studio, the issues around the Trump impeachment saga and what the effect will be here at home in South Africa. It was a few days ago, almost a week ago, when we saw the rand dipping in the wake of that inquiry. What are your forecasts?
One thing's of the predictability of policy. Remember, we've gone through, for example, in the age of Trump, issues, for example, in tax in the US, and therefore the market's responding very positive to that. But then, of course, we know we've got these issues around his fights with China, the trade wars. Those trade wars are actually quite important to think about, and whether or not it looked like, there was some resolution that was at bay. If he leaves, then that sort of changes the policy outlook of the U.S., especially on trade. So how do we think about that? And I think that's probably one of also the key things.
You think it might be a positive thing for us?
It probably is.
All right, well, thanks very much for us and perhaps the rest of the world. I shouldn't say that. Thanks very much for coming into the studio. Klantipai is an economist giving us his view on a whole range of issues and, of course, the outcomes of that ANC NEC meeting.